Gridiron 360. I'm Bill. That's Dave.
Hello.
And we are going to talk now about the college football playoff rankings from their second ranking coming out last night. That's right. Let's go. Time to jump around, get up and get down. We are going to talk about this chaos situation that could potentially happen. The goods, the bads, the what have yous, the ins, the outs, the quid pro quos.
What's quid pro quo?
This is why we split up the recap preview so we didn't drag all that on for too long, and you could decide which one you want to listen to. Hopefully you'll listen to both, but we appreciate you listening at all. We are going to get into this and have a lot of fun and spend some time on these rankings.
All right, let's do it.
So as we said, the second official college football playoff committee rankings dropped last night. And let's do what we did last week, eh? Let's run from 25 to 1, talk about who sits where and their current record.
Sounds good.
Start.
All right, number 25, the Appalachian State, whatever's, Miners? No,
Mountaineers.
What are they? Mountaineers. I knew it was something like that.
Yeah.
All right, 8-1.
Yeah, they won against an SEC school in the Cox on the road last week, and that'll put them right back in it, didn't it?
Yep.
Number 24, out of the Big 12, Kansas State University sits at 6-3. Remember, Kansas State beat Oklahoma.
All right, number 23, a little late. Happy Veterans Day to all our veterans out there.
Yes, happy Veterans Day.
So we're talking about some of our future veterans in the Navy squad that's 7-1 at 23.
Pretty good there with Navy. Everybody was talking at the beginning of the year like the Army being the dark horse, but it was the other one, the other Service Academy. At number 22, the Chuba Hubbards and the Oklahoma State Cowboys sitting at 6-3, also out of the Big 12.
Interestingly, because I want to just add a little point there, last week there was only one 3-loss team in there, and you will see there is more than one, as that's our second one. At number 21, Boise State at 8-1.
Yep, Mountain West still has a representative out there in Boise State. We'll move to 20, the University of Iowa Hawkeyes. Also 3 losses, sitting with 6-3. Got a big one this weekend we talked about. Got the undefeated Golden Gophers coming to town.
All right, at number 19, our fourth and final 6-3 team, the Texas Longhorns.
That's perplexing to me. At number 18, the second, oh no, I'm sorry, this would be the third group of 5 team coming in the rankings in Mike Norvell's University of Memphis Tigers, sitting at 8-1.
And the final group of 5 team and the highest rated, number 17, Cincinnati Bearcats at 8-1.
Number 16, your independent Notre Dame Fighting Irish at 7-2.
And then we will hail to Michigan at number 15, 7-2.
That is correct. We got Wisconsin at number 14, sitting at 7-2.
Speaking of jump around.
And speaking of jump around, and also still possibility for them to slip in. We'll talk more about that.
Absolutely. Number 13, the lowest rated undefeated team. I will save my bitching for a moment from now. At 9-0, the Baylor Bears.
And at number 12, the 7-2 Auburn University Tigers. War Damn Eagle.
All right, number 11. It sucks to be a Florida Gator at 8-2. Sorry, Seminole fan.
Number 10, dropping back a slot from last week, yet still is squeaking out that victory last minute by stopping a two-point conversion from Iowa State to win the game, is your Oklahoma Sooners at 8-1.
And formerly a playoff team not anymore. The Penn State Nittany Lions fall to 8-1 at number 9.
At number 8, making the biggest jump in the top 25 ranked teams from 17 last week to 8, undefeated University of Minnesota Golden Gophers rowing the boat with Coach P.J. Fleck.
And at number 7, Pac-12 South frontrunner Utah Utes at 8-1.
At number 6, the Duckies. My man Justin Herbert, my man Mario Cristobal of the University of Oregon at 8-1.
And at number 5, the fumbling, bumbling Tide of Alabama are 8-1 after their game with LSU.
We're getting right into it, man. We went right through this top 4. As it sits now, if it were to end today, these teams would be playing for it all. Number 4 at 8-1, your University of Georgia Bulldogs.
At number 3, your defending national champion Clemson Tigers at 10-0.
At number 2, taking a slip back from last week's 1 slot, only due to the big bout between Bama and LSU, is the Ohio State University Buckeyes at 9-0.
And number 1, no surprise to anyone, after taking on Alabama on the road, the LSU Tigers at 9-0 top the list.
Okay. Where would you like to begin?
I think we can go to a lot of places here. So here's my question.
Let's go by conference.
Well, hold on.
maybe,
Before
yeah?
we go by conference, no. Let's just go right to the top. Let's do this.
Okay.
Top 4 only. Top 4 only. Forget rationale and everything else. Did the committee get the top 4 right coming out of this week?
I think so. I had talked to my buddy Chris yesterday, who's a big SEC guy. He works for Saturdays down south. He's an Alabama guy. And I said to him, it wouldn't surprise me if Ohio State, because they just absolutely shellacked Maryland, even though Maryland sucks, stayed where they are. But the logic, obviously, is the winner of that Alabama-LSU game, especially with Alabama at 3 and LSU sitting right behind them at 2, was going to make the move up. And they did. So, I do think they got it right with the top 4 only, simply because everybody, Penn State bounced, Alabama bounced, everybody shifted up 1. Logically, that is the most common sense, I think, of what they could have done, with this ranking. I mean, surprisingly, because sometimes logic doesn't seem to come into play with these things. But, again, they say they go in every week with a clean slate. It's still a little muddled to me. Does that mean because in that sense, it tells me they're not even, they throw out what their rankings were last week, but I don't really see how you can do that. There's got to be some sense of their previous week's ranking coming into play somehow. There's so many of these metrics we've talked about. You could poke holes and go down wormholes in any of these things, and honestly, at the end of the day, at where we are now, I still think the last ditch metric is eye test. I just still think that's what it is. And, again, we could go down any wormhole, and we will on some of this, but I do think they got it right for the top 4, at least for this week. How about you?
Absolutely not. They didn't get it right.
No, why not?
Not even close.
What do you think should be different?
The single. Listen, Herm Edwards is the smartest man in football. Because what is Herm Edwards famous for saying? We play to win the game.
Yeah.
We play to win the game, right? If that's why do we love college football? Why does everyone love college football? You said it in the car when we were driving around.
Every week matters.
Every week matters. If you're undefeated and you're in a Power 5, you belong at the top. End of story. Because If logic says, you just said it yourself, that the committee has come out and said this, that in the end, every week is something new. If that's the case, then in reality, you believe that everything will take care of itself. Above all else, nothing is more important than winning. Because you know what they don't do? They don't go to the playoffs and go and say, okay, we're going to play it. Instead of playing a single elimination, we're going to play a round robin, and then we're going to decide by the eye test who the best team is, no matter who wins or loses. Because you play to win the game. So penalizing winners for other statistics and whatever else you want to call it is garbage. I'm sorry. So I will say this. Eye test matters if you got a 0 next to your name. And when there's more zeros than there are slots in the playoffs, I can hear your argument. Until then, I'm sorry. I just don't see it. I think this I said it last week. You as the Clemson fan and the guy with skin in the game said, I don't care. They did us a favor. Because if we just went out, we'll take care of it. And they left you guys out and it pissed you off. And they poked the bear, which I think is legit. I think you're right. But the simple fact is, if you're undefeated, you're in a Power 5 conference, that stands before all else with me.
Okay, well, I mean, like by that rationale, you're saying that either Minnesota, I would assume you would rather see Minnesota at 4, maybe Baylor 5.
Yeah, I mean,
is that what you're saying?
If that's the logic, yeah. Because think about it. Because here's the whole thing is,
but you also said everything's going to take care of itself, and if they had done that, which is what they showed last week in my mind, like the way you used the term that it was a little bit of cowardice on the committee's part because they knew everything. They lined it up because they knew everything would take care of itself.
It's two things.
Then this week, it's kind of like they didn't go with that logic because if they had put those teams up there, then everything will eventually rear its head. Either they continue to win and they'll be, at the end of the day, they should be up there, or they'll take a loss somewhere and then they'll tumble.
Well, yeah, and let me give you a perfect example. So by putting Baylor at 13, right, you're basically saying this team's a fraud. Their wins are frauds. They're frauds. That's what you're saying, okay? They're not as good as everybody thinks they are, and we're not going to give them credit for that. So I'm going to give you an example. You put them at number 5, okay? And I think that would be a good they would be the least, they have the least best resume of the undefeateds. Okay? They get absolutely destroyed by Oklahoma. Okay? Let's throw that out there. You have all your justification for putting them somewhere else. But what are you using? You're using an actual gameplay to determine that they don't belong there. Whereas right now, everybody's just using that eye test. Well, the eye test said Minnesota sucked and they were 17. Guess what? I watched them play one of your playoff teams, and they took them. The whole game they had them, and they took them. And now all of a sudden it's like, well, we got to give them respect. But see, what that number 8 says to me, it's, well, we look like fools, so we can't put them all the way up to number 4 because they did just beat a playoff team, right? So if LSU gets elevated over Ohio State, tell me what Ohio State did to lose their number 1 spot. What did they do? 73-14, and they lose a spot. And you can give me all the Alabama versus LSU, but again, it's all the BSI tests. The simple fact to me is they won. So if Baylor goes at number 5 and gets housed by Oklahoma, guess what you get to say? They are who we thought they were, and you can do with them whatever they want. Because what do you think is going to happen to Clemson if they lose to Wake Forest today? They're going to fall like a missile in the rankings, okay? So the point is, you have your chance to say all of that, but is it really about record? Is it about record? Because if you want to sit here and tell me whether Baylor winning close games against teams in their conference is you're telling me it's uglier than Georgia choking against South Carolina? You're telling me it's uglier than Utah losing to USC? You're telling me
I agree there.
It's uglier than Oklahoma losing to K-State? You're telling me it's uglier than Florida losing twice?
That's probably maybe my biggest confusion when we're talking the Big 12, how they have Baylor sitting at number 13, yet with no losses in the Big 12. Yet Oklahoma, with 1 loss in the Big 12, is at number 10. So I guess, I mean, like, if you look at it, there was the game that Oklahoma lost was to Kansas State, who Baylor handled 31-12. So that's confusing me a bit because Oklahoma's schedule is not that much greater than Baylor's at this point in the season, that with one loss, they should be 3 slots ahead of Baylor. That's confusing.
But that's kind of too when you see we mentioned it, 3 teams, or excuse me, 1 team had 3 losses last week, and then the next week you got 4 teams in there with 3 losses, one of those being Texas. So now all of a sudden, what did Texas do that all of a sudden we value them that much more?
I told you earlier that.
In 1 week.
Yeah, I told you when we ran down the rankings. That perplexes me. I don't see it in Texas. I think Ellinger's still a great quarterback, but it's a different cast of characters on that offense. The defense hasn't been as great. Granted, they've had injuries, but all teams go through that. And I know that when it's a player like Tua or a player like Trevor Lawrence last year, if they get banged up, that does get taken into consideration. But, I mean, you're talking about multiple guys on the defense that will come back. But I don't understand how they slip back in because they just haven't looked the part. There's a lot of teams out there. Maybe it's because they were close with LSU in that game. That's the only thing I can think of that got them in is in a close loss to LSU that's looked highly upon because now LSU sits at 1.
Well, let me say that. Let me go back to some things. So this is where it doesn't make sense to me. Okay, so everybody said before the playoff, almost everybody I heard on TV, radio, everywhere, and we're talking about all the big guns in here, said Ohio State looks like by far the most balanced team just based off this. Okay, so we're talking about a team that's first in points scored per game. We're talking about a team that's first in points allowed per game. We're talking about a team that's first in yards allowed per game. We're talking about a team that's 5th in total yards per game on offense. Okay,
they're number 1 in game control. They're number 2 in strength of record. They're number 38 in strength of schedule. But you got LSU not at 19 in strength of schedule, Clemson at 69 in strength of schedule, and Georgia at 29 in strength of schedule. So if you're looking at that strength of schedule, yeah, LSU's is the highest of all of them, Clemson being the lowest of all of them, but they're right there in the mix.
Well, okay.
So is it the Chase Young factor? He was out because it didn't affect them at all.
Yep. Well, again, I'll go back to here you got a team that's 36th in points allowed, 4th in points scored per game, okay, in LSU, who got 41 points dumped on them. Now, I get the 2 versus 3, and I'm a realist. I watch the games. I watch eye test. I watch all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But like you said, it's all new every week to week, right?
That's what I mean.
Okay.
I don't know. That's what we think. That's what we're told.
So then should I almost look at it like, so what, were the first 8 games of the season irrelevant? Are they relevant? What's the story? Because again, I look at all this and let's take a simple fact. We can say Bama hung with LSU. Okay. Alabama was at home. Alabama turned the ball over 3 times in this game, and 2 of them, you could argue the third, but 2 of them were absolutely like a gunshot to the head. They were horrid.
Yep.
Tua just dropping the ball, not LSU taking it away from him. A punter having a botched snap. Now, I guess that wasn't a turnover because he did fall on it, but it was, in all essence, it was a turnover because it cost them like 50 yards.
Yeah.
And then you look at the pick that Tua threw in that game, which was terrible. So I look at that, a team that did everything to shoot themselves in the foot. LSU still didn't put them away, because Alabama came back. But yet you're talking about 2 teams that got scored on like it was going out of style. So you look at all these different things, and I look at it and go back to, what did Ohio State do to lose that number? If they were so dominant, they beat a team 73-14. A conference team, 73-14. That's hard to do in most conferences, and I'm talking about your doormats. That's hard to do. They did that, and yet they lose their spot, okay? I haven't even touched on Clemson yet. So I look at all this, and it's like, my whole thing is, I look at this group, and this is why I don't like it. I know you and I have gone back and forth on this. The BCS was the right way to do it. for a 4 playoff team, because this subjectivity is nonsense. And the reality is there's still subjectivity in the BCS when you're talking about using the polls as your manner of doing it. But the simple fact of this is, Paul Feinbaum said something, and I caught it on him, and he was talking about Clemson. This is before the rankings. Didn't belong on there, and even though they're doing Clemson a favor by manufacturing the number 19 spot for Wake Forest so they can play a ranked team in their game. I
wouldn't necessarily disagree with that. We talked about that
Okay,
last week.
but this is an SEC homer guy talking about manufacturing rankings. What was Texas A&M ranked starting the year off?
I don't even remember.
They were ranked.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I want to say they were ranked maybe somewhere between 20 and 15, maybe even a little bit more. Is that Texas A&M team, a team that could end up the year, definitely going to probably end up with four losses, could end up with 5. And the year is done.
Okay, let me rip something off.
Who's not even in this ranking at this point.
I get it, dude, but we went away from the BCS to take some of that human element out of it. I know that they consider the AP and coaches poll, which are all human element, but at the end of the day, then the computer took all these things and spit it out. And what I'm seeing here after this week, the way that the BCS would have it, based on theirs, LSU 1, Ohio State 2, Minnesota 3, Oregon 4, Baylor 5, Penn State 6, Clemson 7, Georgia 8, Auburn 9, Utah 10. That's your top 10. Alabama's at 12. Oklahoma's at 15.
Yep.
That's the way the BCS would have it right now.
Okay, you're right. And I wouldn't have a problem with that.
Mm.
Because here's why. Here's my problem. When you've got here's the like you're
People
either,
got
you're
upset
either
because
100%,
you didn't know if you had the 4 best teams in it with the BCS always, or the best teams in it. And that's why we created this playoff.
What's the point of the playoff? What's the point of the playoff?
To get the 4 best teams in there.
Nope. That's not the point of the playoff.
What's the point of the playoff?
The point of the playoff is to find the best team in college football when it's all said and done. The BCS, the fear was, because there were years where there was a possibility, and this year could be an example, where there could be an undefeated team out there. Remember the Auburn year, where Auburn was undefeated and left out. The problem is there was a fear that there could be 3 undefeated teams left, and we wouldn't get a true national championship. That was the real problem with it. It was not getting the 4 best teams in college football. It was about finding the best football team in college football.
How do you do that unless you get the 4 best teams in there? How do you determine that it's the best team?
Okay, well, let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question. After Notre Dame played last year, was it last year?
You mean
in the playoffs?
Played us, yeah.
Was Notre Dame one of the 4 best teams in college football when it was all said and done in anybody's mind? No. But did you find the true national championship? Do you ever feel like the best team in football didn't win since the playoff has been around?
No.
Okay, so the point is to find the best team in college football and allow them to prove it on the field. Okay, because the simple fact is, just like the BCS could leave out the second best team in college football, the college football playoff can still leave out the 4th best team. Okay, and I'll give you a perfect example. Last year, who was the biggest argument to get into the playoffs that didn't get into the playoffs? Georgia.
Georgia.
Yeah. But Georgia took those losses and was left out, right? Did we still not find out who the best team in college football was last year? Does anybody really think Clemson wasn't the best team?
No, I think we were
so
right. But again, I
that's
think
the point.
The BCS didn't give the opportunity. And then, because now you're leading into why we should expand it, and I don't agree with that.
No, I'm not. No, I'm not.
I think with 4, it's expanded enough that you give an opportunity for some of these other teams to maybe prove themselves, whereas the BCS,
I'm with you. I agree.
Like, these 2 teams are going head-to-head for the title, and that's the end of the
No.
story.
The problem with the BCS, let's here's my point is, the BCS was a ranking system. Don't look at the BCS as 1 and 2. That's not what I'm saying. And I'm not saying expand. The BCS was a ranking system. I'm telling you, the system that ranked those teams right now, as you have it right there, I would tell you, would find, when it's all said and done, would find the national championship in the top 4.
I don't disagree with you, but then, like you said, the AP poll and the coaches poll come into play, and one of the things we always have a problem with at the beginning of the year is those polls and their preseason rankings. To me, it's BS. You got to have it handled on the field. but those
I agree.
polls and the way they rank them preseason affects how they will sit the rest of the year.
So are you telling me you think the polls throughout this whole year and where the teams are ranked in the polls right now had no bearing whatsoever on this playoff group?
Oh, I totally believe it.
Okay,
does.
so
They're
my
not
point is it gets
that's what I said before.
It gets twisted.
Okay, so that's what I said before. These guys are supposed to go in, no bias, blinders on, but that's fine
They're
when they
people.
walk into the room. But that whole week when they're not in that room listening to the media and looking at all that stuff, if you don't think one iota that they're thinking about what the media and national narrative is, when just because they walk into that room and they can't drop those AP or coaches on the table. If you don't think that some of those, if not all of those committee members have that in their head and what everybody's perception nationally is, well, then you're wrong. You're wrong because they do consider that. You said it. They're human. They're human. How can you think about
let's
that?
not kid ourselves. Okay, so let's use another example. One thing the BCS did. Now, it had a coaches poll, right? Right?
Yeah.
There's a coaches poll element to it.
Yep.
What is the coaches poll? One thing that it does that this doesn't do. It gives every single team an opinion. But right now, what we've got is who's the leader of this group? What is his role? He's the AD at Oregon.
Mm-hmm.
Who's got a shot at this playoff? Oregon. But did
he-
every other school? Does Clemson get a seat at that table? And I know
We
this
have.
whole
We've had it.
Right. But I'm saying
our
every
AD,
year.
Dan Radakovich, has been a member of that committee the
Okay.
past.
But my point is, they're not every year. So here's my problem with that: so now I've heard all this thing like, oh, when they talk about Oregon, the Oregon guy has to leave the room. Are you shitting me?
Right.
Is this friggin' kindergarten?
But that's what they say.
Is this kindergarten?
You have to leave the room.
You leave the room. Okay, but what do you do when you're not in the room? Oh, well, I'm talking to all these other people. Oregon never came up?
Yeah,
I mean,
you got to be kidding yourself.
But that's my point is, what I want is, why I think it's garbage is it doesn't value these things the way that it should. And so therefore, like, at least with the BCS formula, there was a formula that says, for right or wrong, this is how we determine it. Right now, if you're telling me that this thing is so blind that each week is a whole new week, okay, so what does that mean? We forget everything else? Because again, I go look back. How does Ohio State fall? How do they fall? How do you win 73-14? You're the most complete team. Every stat says you are the best, and yet you fall. Oh, well, because we played Alabama. Well, is Alabama that good? Because right there with your BCS ranking says Alabama's
15.
not so good. Because guess what? Guess how many wins Alabama has against a top 25 team this year?
None.
0.
Unless it was, again, this is where it is wildly inconsistent. This is why I believe that at the end of the day it becomes the eye test. That's what they want is the four. You say they want the national champ. I get it, but what they say is they want the 4 best teams in this thing when all's said and done. And it's so wildly inconsistent with how they're not even on how they're measuring these teams. And again, you can poke holes in all these different metrics. And what they say for one team, well, they had their game control was much better than the other teams, and so therefore they should be up there. But let me ask you this. So are you a proponent of going back to a BCS model?
Formula with
Yes.
with a 4-team playoff? Absolutely. And you know what? I don't care
You
what
don't think
what
that there'll be teams left out that might be more deserving? I mean,
remember
they
one of
have
the big
us. We're 10-0.
remember what one of the
And
big,
they have us at 7 based on that model. And even if we win out based on that model, I bet you damn well we won't be a top 4 team based on that model, even if we win out.
I don't think so. Well, number one, here's why. Here's why.
Why? Because Wake was our only hope, and to have something, because obviously South Carolina's not it. Whoever we face from the Coastal and ACC Championship ain't going to give us any love. So Wake was the only other ranked team we got this weekend. They just get bounced.
Look, and
How's that model not going to end up still leaving us on the outside looking in, even if we run the table?
Well, the simple fact is this: is one, you've got to be able to put out. Are they? Let me ask you this. I don't even know this answer, which is pretty sad. But Do they even still do the AP in the coaches poll at this point?
Yeah, I believe they do.
Okay. So here's the thing is, my point is there should be some formula involved in this. And I'm not saying the BCS formula as we left it is entirely where we want it to be. But do you remember one of the big problems with the BCS formula was, oh, well, you know what? The way that you win games was starting to run up the score.
Yes, they do, because the AP poll right now has Bama at 4.
What does it have?
It has LSU, Ohio State, Clemson, Bama, Georgia, Oregon, Minnesota, Utah, Penn State, Oklahoma.
What does the coaches poll have you at?
The coaches poll has it LSU, Ohio State, Clemson, Bama, Georgia, Oregon, just about the same.
And the BCS formula still has you guys at 7.
That I just showed you, yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So regardless of the point of that, I think it would take care of itself. I think it would clean itself up pretty quickly. Realistically, I think the way this year ends, Clemson ends up at number 2 at the least. Could end up at number 1. Remember, these teams somebody's going to take some losses here.
Yeah, but I mean, well, let's get into that.
Here's my point. Here's my point. You just said it's wildly inconsistent. We want it to be the eye test. Okay, well then I ask a simple question: why the hell do we release this until the end of the year? Why do we release it? What's the point? What's the point if every week is different from week to week to week?
Ratings.
Bingo. All right.
Ratings.
So if it's ratings.
Now it gives some people something to watch every Tuesday night, to tune in to ESPN, and then tune in all week for the continued discussion and chatter about the rankings, and hopefully pump up games this late in the season that may be good matchup or maybe not be good matchup, but they're important.
Exactly.
Ratings.
Okay.
Because ratings translate into what?
So exactly right. So how does Notre Dame get into that title game? Do they win or do they not win? If it's not winning, if it's the eye test, okay, well, the real first question isn't really who looks better. It's who's getting looked at the most, because that's ratings. Notre Dame, do they belong? Do they not belong? Whatever. You want to argue your case. I just use them as the example because they were the national team for decades. They were the team in college football for decades. Now, decades passed, but decades, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's that name associated with it. So you look at this, and you know what? And maybe a Clemson team does get left out, but really what it happens is it all comes down to the rankings of these teams early on in the year, which we know are completely biased. Half of them are made the hell up. So really, what does it matter? Why do we come out with any of this at all? Like, I look at it, I'm sorry, I look at it, it comes down to this. You win your games. And if those conferences are so unbalanced, then guess what? Bag the NCAA. Just get rid of it. Get rid of it and just have conferences run it, because the truth of the matter is,
no, there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, there's a lot, we all know people's thoughts on the NCAA, good or bad, mostly on the bad side. But, look, again, I refer back to my conversation with my friend. He did a Facebook Live for Saturdays Down South, talk about the SEC. You got all these SEC folks dogging the Clemson Tigers for our schedule. So I just dropped it as this. Okay, so if we go and they're, Clemson's schedule. So if we get in this thing and run the table and win the whole damn thing, are we then not deserving because we had a cakewalk through and we had it easy? We didn't get a lot of injuries, and then you have a month off before the first playoff game to get prepared, and meanwhile these other teams have been dragged through the mud the whole season. So good, lucky them. And then the response, for the most part, was like, no, you deserve it if you be. It's just wildly inconsistent in my mind. Wildly inconsistent. Do I think that it'll all work out in the end? Yeah. But I want to move this conversation now into, well, there is still, even though there's 3 weeks left, there's a lot of games, a lot of tough games to be played. So where can the chaos then happen?
Yeah, well, I think it can happen. Well, one.
So let's talk about that. Where's the chaos going to happen starting this weekend?
Chaos can happen everywhere, and I guess that's kind of my point of my argument. I'm not even telling you my answer is even right, but if I go with this blind eye test, and this is what this is a point to this because we're talking about where the chaos can go is you can spin any team anyway. I can spin Alabama in the fact that they lost to the number 2 team, or number 1 now, but they lost to the number 2 team in the country. And it was a close game. I can spin that and make out, because I can look at it and go, well, they should be ahead of Georgia because Georgia lost to a crappy South Carolina team that just got beat by Appalachian State.
Yep.
I mean, I can spin
you can
it.
spin it anyway. I mean, like,
Right.
How is that better than Alabama's loss? How is that better even than Oregon's loss last minute, and yet they're still in front?
Yeah.
And look, here's the other thing. I know, well, we can't look back on last year. Can't look back on last year.
Yep.
Can't look back on last year. But we preach a lot about on the college side of this is how important coaching is involved in this thing. And our friend Mr. Feinbaum goes on yesterday, and they have the LSUers and Alabama's calling in, and he didn't have them in the top 4. He had them where they are right here at 5 in his ranking. But his thing is look, we still have the best coach in college football, and Nick Saban. I wouldn't disagree with that, but does that not look back based on past historicals? I mean, like, his success as a head coach historically, but we're not supposed to consider that, right? I mean, like, that just and I think I don't disagree with him. I think you have to take that into some form of consideration. You have to. I know that teams lose guys, and it's new teams every year, but some of these teams have guys returning on certain sides of the ball that, or even complete offense or complete defense that actually maybe better than they were the year previous. All the coaches are still intact. All the mentality is still there. The way they run the programs, the way we handle our business is still the same. How can you not give a wink to what might have happened these past several years to say, you know what, this is a team that, they get hot, they're dangerous. They're very dangerous, and they can compete with the best of them. But that's not it. You can't have that narrative. Can't have it, because if you are, well, this team lost all these guys, or this team lost all these guys to the NFL, or this, that, and the other, even though statistically some of those rankings, though they lost them, are better. And you know where I'm going with that, but I don't want to be that much of a homer. I mean, it's just wildly inconsistent, and I do think that ultimately, at the end of the day, though it's not supposed to have that bias. Eye test is a bias thing. It's a subjective thing. Eye test is a subjective thing. It's not objective to me. It's subjective, because it could, what one committee member sees in one team could be completely different than the guy sitting or gal sitting next to him.
Yeah.
And eye test is what I think at the end of the day, like you said, why do we do these right now? Because they want to get themselves to the point where they're at that last week where if there's a question about one of the teams getting into that 4 slot, which has been the way it was the past several years, maybe this year the 3 or 4 slot, then at the end of the day, I think they're going to look at eye test.
Yeah, but here's my thing, and this is kind of where my BCS type argument comes from. I don't really care that it's the BCS, and I don't necessarily care what the formula is. I want everybody, my point is, I want everybody to play by the same set of rules. And this is not, when I look at the rankings, because you can read through the logic of it, you can see it all, does not play by the same set of rules. It is your rules are different than mine.
Unfortunately, though, if what you're saying, though, from that, I mean, I'd love to, jump back to, 12 months ago, because UCF, by that matter, might have slipped in at some point.
Said Power 5. That's an important thing. But look, listen, I'll go back to, I remember when Boise State was on their first run, and everybody said, oh, they don't belong in any of these big games. They don't belong in these big games. I seem to remember them beating an Oklahoma team that was a powerhouse.
Yep.
In a game, in a major top 4 bowl.
Yeah.
So here's my thing about it. I want it all on the same playing field, because then you start talking about past history. Let me give a little bit of interesting history that I've looked up. And I looked up where, like, so far since the college playoff has been played, Okay? Because, I want to kind of go on this let's shit on the ACC mentality. What conference has been to the most playoff games? If you had to guess. SEC. Okay? You know how many they've been to?
Playoff games altogether? Is that
6?
6? Yeah. I
Okay.
was going to say 8.
Who's been to the second most?
It's got to be ACC.
Okay, how many have they been to?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
5. Okay. Who's been to the third?
It's got to be the Big Ten, right?
Ohio State.
Ohio State.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
Because outside of that, then you got an Oklahoma that jumped in 1 year, a Washington that jumped in 1 year, a Oregon that jumped in 1 year, and a Notre Dame team that jumped in 1 year.
Who's got the most national championships? What conference?
Is it tied? SEC and ACC?
Yep. Alabama 2, Clemson 2. Okay. Who's got the best winning percentage in the college football playoff era? An ACC team or an SEC team?
Well, going into last season's national championship, we were neck and neck with Bama. But we won. I would say it's us. I would say the ACC.
Overall, it's tied by conference, but Clemson has the best winning percentage. Okay. So to me, when you get in, how you do when you get into those games matters. And
right.
But we would look at Clemson and we would look at Bama's strength of schedule during those years, and I'm sure the perception would be, and I'm not even saying it's wrong, that Alabama had the tougher road.
Right.
But my point is, there's Clemson, 5-2 in the playoffs, 2 national championships, and the best winning percentage. So again, I go back to, it is not. I will argue this point until I'm dead, that it is not about finding the 4 best teams in college football. It is about finding the best team in college football, making sure we crown the true champion. I don't think you need to expand to do that. I think there is a formula. What I don't like is what comes back down to is this ratings concept. And, people are saying, oh, we don't want it to be Clemson and Alabama. You've heard this. You're a Clemson fan. We don't want to see this every year. We're sick of it. We're sick of it.
We're sick of the Warriors and the Cavs.
And the answer is, so get in there and beat them, okay? Which I agree with. Beat them. Don't complain about them. Beat them. But here in this model, we're talking about not allowing that to play out by playing favorites. We're talking what's going to be the biggest scandal if this was to play out is how Bama's getting an opportunity to run back into it, right? I mean, that's going to be the biggest player. But I would look to you right now, and you said they got it right. Well, if it's every week and it's week to week and the playoffs were to end today, would it be right that a Minnesota team gets left out? Would it be right?
I mean, based on my comments last week where we sat, no. Okay. I don't think it would be, but then you still have an argument about Baylor too.
Right. So
then you're arguing one of those teams in the 4 slot. Which one of those is more deserving in the 4 slot, basically?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, but those two. But would you feel more comfortable with the fact that 4 undefeated teams go in the playoff, regardless of who the 5th one is left out? I'm sure because every fan base that gets left out would be pissed, right? But would you feel better about that, or would you feel better about Georgia getting that slot, or Alabama, or Penn State, or Oregon?
That's where your eye test comes in. That's where your eye test – because on the surface, that goose egg past the dash, especially if it's a conference champion, should mean more. It should. Everything else, strength of record, schedule, game control, you said it at the start of this. We play to win the game.
Okay.
So that should mean more. But unfortunately, that's not what it is.
Okay.
Because the eye test comes into play, and they say, well, if Alabama lined up against Minnesota, they beat the crap out of them. If Alabama lined up against Baylor, they beat the crap out of them.
Yep. I like the idea. I don't like the rankings in reality.
And that's
in some
not
ways.
A wrong thing to say. I mean,
but
it is Alabama. But why do we feel that way about Alabama? Past history.
Yep.
It's not talking about this year. You're not. You have them up there that high. Their strength of schedule is not that good. And the one big game they had on their own turf, and they lost. And they let 46 get dropped on them.
Yep.
And so But still, the reason you see it the way it is, that those undefeated teams in some Power 5 conferences, still with a lot ahead of them, but you can't project either, that this is going to happen or that's going to happen. That's why they play it on the field. But that is where this eye test starts to rattle cages.
Let me give you a scenario. Again, I go back to, because my point is whether these rankings were right, and I say no. And I'm going to give you an example. So let's just take the playoffs as they stand right now. Let's say Georgia runs the table in the playoffs and wins with one loss.
Uh-huh.
Let me give you another scenario. Let's say that Minnesota takes on Alabama in a bowl game and smashes Alabama. Don't even smash them, just beats them. Beats them outright.
Beat 'em.
Georgia, 1 loss. Minnesota, 0 losses.
That would be tough. That would be a tough pill to
Now,
swallow.
if I got all 5,
especially as a Minnesota fan.
Yeah, now if
But historicals, like Minnesota's not a team that known to do that.
But that's the situation. And this is exactly why. And the whole argument against the BCS goes back to that Auburn year where they went undefeated and got left out. And the whole point of that is that you don't want that to happen again. Now, my thing is, here's the difference. In my scenario, we'll just say Baylor gets left out because they're the lowest ranked undefeated team. And 4 undefeated teams play. I think the argument's a hell of a lot better when somebody runs the table with no losses and Baylor goes and plays and beats whoever and finishes undefeated. Well, you know what they're like? To me, they're like UCF. Now, did they get screwed maybe in a way? Yeah, you could argue that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think more people could swallow that than a scenario like I just gave you. I guess my point is wins matter. They need a formula that you can explain to everybody. Because here's the whole thing.
Well, that's consistent. That if you're going to take these metrics, how do those metrics stack up from, say they have, God, I can't even know how many they have. But let's just say there's, 5, 6 metrics. Yep. From 1 to 6, what's the most important metric? Okay? Then from there, go to the second one, third, fourth, okay? And go like that. But it's not. It's wildly inconsistent with these metrics. And then again, at the end of the day, even if eye test is the 6 of those 6 metrics, it seems to weigh as much as the number one thing that they might consider as the top metric. I mean, where does I felt like, especially after last year, there was a big cry for an undefeated or even just a conference champ. Really having a lot of importance, winning your conference championship. I felt like that's what they were trying to really put a lot of weight into moving forward in these things. I just don't believe it. I don't believe it. So now, but all right, we're rambling on about this. I want to go chaos scenario. Because that's fun. All okay? Right. So let's start with the SEC, okay? Because that's the big one. You got Georgia traveling to Auburn banged up this week, right?
Yep.
They lose.
Okay.
They have 2 losses. Mm-hmm. Still going to the SEC championship.
Your assumption is they went out after that.
They went out after that. They go. Yep. LSU continues their march undefeated, and then they get dropped by Georgia in the SEC championship. So you have a 2-loss SEC champ and a 1-loss SEC team that didn't win their championship, and a 1-loss Bama that runs the table, let's say, sitting on the outside that didn't play for the conference championship. Mm-hmm. Now what happens? Because Georgia, 2 losses, they won the toughest conference in college football.
Okay, can I assume a undefeated Clemson team in that scenario?
Sure.
Can I assume an undefeated Big Ten component?
Yes, so say Ohio State just for this, but I do want to talk about a chaos scenario with Big Ten.
Okay. Can I also assume a 1-loss Oregon-Utah winner?
Sure. That they meet in Pac-12, they continue their course, and that the winner of that game, whether it be, you said Oregon, so let's say Oregon.
Okay, we'll go with Oregon.
Because then if you're talking
more
Utah,
higher,
then it could be even more of a question because the loss that In my mind, the loss, obviously, and to everybody that Oregon took is a better loss than the loss that Utah took on the road at Southern Cal.
Okay. All right. So, do you want to know what I think happens or
Yeah.
what I think should happen?
Well, either. You
Okay.
could give me both.
Um,
What do you think happens? You tell me that first, and then you tell me what you think should happen.
SEC gets left out.
That's what you think
Should happen. Yeah, because again, I'm making assumptions, but if you got an undefeated Pac-10 team, or an undefeated Big Ten team, let's just say Ohio State.
So
make
they
it
slide
simple.
Up, they go to 1.
Yep.
We move
Ohio
up,
State to
we
1.
go to 2.
You're 2.
So then you got a 3 and a 4 slot.
You've
open.
got a 1-loss conference winner in the Pac-12.
right.
And let me just say this. If Oklahoma runs the table and wins their conference with 1 loss, they would be a 1-loss conference winner.
Mm-hmm.
The SEC should be left on the outside looking in.
You-
Now let's say Oklahoma doesn't win and you don't have a 1-loss conference winner. Say Oklahoma loses to Baylor, has 2 losses,
Say
and then
Baylor-
plays
okay,
Baylor again and
let's
beats
throw
them.
this in. Baylor, Oklahoma meet this weekend. Oklahoma wins. Then they meet again.
In the title game, and
And
Baylor,
Baylor
wins.
wins.
Yes. Okay. Then at that point, the Big 12's out of it. Just I think what'll happen. And they're not they would be well, in that instance, technically Baylor would be a 1-loss conference winner.
Yeah.
Then I would say they're out. They're out.
Who? Baylor?
SEC.
SEC.
Okay. Now what do I think is going to happen?
Mm-hmm.
In that scenario, I think likely you'd probably see 2 SEC teams in it. Sadly,
You're saying Ohio State probably 1, Clemson
2.
probably 2, Georgia probably 3 because they won the SEC. Even though if they lose to Auburn, they have 2 losses. How can you rank them above LSU?
No,
at 4?
I'm not even necessarily sure that's
Do
the
you
case.
think Alabama slides?
I
in?
think Alabama and LSU could take it over Georgia.
So the SEC champ with 2 losses gets left out for the 2 teams with 1 loss that didn't win the conference. One of them that didn't even play.
National perception voting and all this eye test bullshit. Yep, I definitely see it.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely see it.
And
Um,
that see, my conundrum there is in my mind, I think an SEC team would get in. The question would be which one, but I don't think there's 2 because if we roll down that scenario, I still think, especially if it's Oregon. Now, if it was Utah to win the Pac-12, then I think becomes a question again because of the loss on the road at USC, whereas Oregon's loss in that game, the way the game played out, first game of the year, eons ago, and the way they are playing now, a totally different conversation. But let's just say Oregon handles their business. In my mind, they should get in. It should be Ohio State, Clemson, Oregon. Then there's 1 slot left. It would be an SEC team, but who?
But let me say this: if your scenario were to play out to that degree, where the question is, the SEC by record shouldn't be in it, but their teams with the 1 loss that could be considered are not conference champs. I think that's the gist of it. I will tell you that will lead to an 8-team playoff within 3 years. Because here's what you said. Remember what's the single most important thing in all this to all these voters and these TV? It's ratings, right?
Mm-hmm.
The SEC getting locked out is a ratings killer for them in their mind. I think that matters because think about this. Majority of the people voting have a stake in the college football game, right? In the game of college football itself.
Mm-hmm.
Crushing the ratings of college football does not do justice for anybody in that matter. So there's money. Let's not kid ourselves what rules this game, or else we wouldn't be talking about paying players. If money wasn't in this, we wouldn't be talking about it. So to my mind, that moves us to that 8-team college football playoff. Here's the thing about it is, I'd love to see it because I want to see them answer to this. I think the logic is not logic. The logic is individual perception. My problem and why I like the BCS formula more, and I'm a believer in this idea, the more people that vote on, could you imagine, let's think about it this way. What if, and I know you could argue this with the Electoral College and all, because it's technically everybody that votes are represented by a small majority, but the Electoral College has followed the popular vote in their segments, so that it's really kind of a non-issue. But anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to get political. But the point of it is, what if just like only our senators voted for the president of the United States? Would that scare you a little bit?
Sure.
One person representing hundreds of thousands to millions.
It's not much of a democracy there.
Right. So this is my point is, at least with the AP and the coaches poll being part of it, you have 100+ college football coaches, so you have a larger span of opinion. And to be honest with you, I wouldn't even mind removing the AP, to be honest with you, because these are just writers.
Right.
But there is a large contingent of writers. There's a larger swath in order to smooth out some of those bumps. Right now, we're talking about 11 people picking this. And in that scenario, I'm not saying you're not going to get the best team in college football, but you might not. You might not. And again, the Clemson being left out, and you can argue the past versus there is no argument. I can poke holes that they are using past history in all their arguments. I could poke holes in the fact that they are looking at it with a fresh set of eyes. I can poke holes in the fact that they're looking at strength of schedule, that they're not looking at strength of schedule, that they're looking at game control, but not looking at game control. I just got to go through which teams and show them all that. Like, you can poke holes in all of it. And the truth of the matter is, it's what you said. It's totally eye test, but it's eye test of 11 people that some of them have stake in this and some of them don't directly. But in the end, it's all swaying like, what's going to get us ratings?
I don't disagree with you there. I mean, we know that, money is a big factor in this, if not the biggest. But
I am rooting for your chaos scenario more than I'm rooting for any team.
I think look, I totally respect the SEC, and they are the best conference in college football, historically and presently.
But can we talk about the playoff for a minute? Remember how I brought those statistics up? How many appearances does the SEC have?
Right. Well,
six, right? How many does Bama have?
6.
5. Georgia got in once.
Oh yeah, that's right. Georgia got the 1 year.
And the ACC, how many does Clemson have?
5.
4.
Well, 5 appearances.
4 appearances. 5 is Florida State in the first college football playoff.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So again, so both of those conferences are dominated by one team. So let's not, you know what I mean? We're sitting here talking about the SEC strength. Where's the domination? It's Alabama and it's Clemson in this window. It's Alabama and Clemson. Florida State, the next closest team is Ohio State with 3 appearances, and they're 1-2. So, my point is there's subjectivity and this. It is only on a week-to-week basis, but yeah, there's history, and no, there's not history. My point is this lets them mask what all they're doing.
I still think that that in the committee's mind that everything will play itself out. I think they hope that it'll play itself out, and that the chaos scenarios that we're proposing, I mean, we didn't even jump into the Big Ten. There's all potential chaos that could happen there.
Yep.
That they're hoping those. I think they hope those. At this point, last week was one story. They knew that some things were going to play out this week, and I think moving forward, I think they kind of hope that those chaos scenarios don't play out, so it makes their job easier. And and at the end of the day, I mean, like, if you want to, I do like to look at it. If you were to put these teams right now on a neutral field and they were to go to war, what is your logic for some of these things? Because I got to tell you, LSU, phenomenal season, Heisman front runner, great head coach, great offensive coordinator, 38 put on them by Vanderbilt. And we're not talking they were coming off of a big game. They were in between playing like Northwest Louisiana State and Utah State, and they had Vandy in between, and Vandy dropped a 38 pie on them. And look, this weekend, 41 dropped on them. That's less than desirable. And, yes, I'm a homer for my team. I just don't see, I don't care who we've played or who we've not played, our defense, particularly because we have the best D coordinator in the game, allowing 40 to be dropped on us. And I said this to you earlier. What do of these teams, let me go to the ranking again. Let's see. 1 through 10. Out of the top 10 teams, LSU, Ohio State, Clemson, Georgia, Alabama, Oregon, Utah, Minnesota, Penn State, Oklahoma. There are 2 teams in my mind that have difference makers. Ohio State, and his name is Chase Young, and I fully expect him to be back because there's a lot on the line. Who else has one of those? You can't tell me anyone at LSU. Don't tell me anyone in their defense that's a game changer. Grant Delpit's in the secondary. Your game changer is going to have to be up front. Just like in the NFL, Khalil Mack, Aaron Donald, these Nick Bosa, those guys are the guys that can wreck games. That's Chase Young. Again, I know I'm a homer, but you can go look at the tape. 2 numbers. 1-1. Isaiah Simmons is a game wrecker. And the difference between him and Chase Young could get it done wherever, but Isaiah will go everywhere around the field, up on the line, and linebacker, down deep. That guy will single-handedly take over a game. There's a reason he's the number 1 linebacker and number 8 prospect in the NFL. The kid is a game changer. So I want, and to be honest with you, when it comes down to these big matchups, those guys are very, very impactful and important in the game. So who's the guy for LSU? Who's the guy for Georgia? Who's the guy for Bama? Who's the guy on those teams' defensive front that can change a game single-handedly for their team?
Well, I think Georgia.
Who's the guy?
Georgia's got a much stronger argument. I mean, I agree with you.
Who's the one guy?
Well, it's not. It's a team game. So
I don't bet. Chase Young annihilates people.
I value defenses that can stop teams. I don't care how they do it. I don't care if they do it with 4 guys. I don't care if they do it with 1 guy. I agree with you that those are the most dominant players on dominant defenses by far.
When a play is needed to be made, and you see these guys all season long, no matter the competition, being the guy to make the play, and whose name is constantly being called.
Yeah, well, you're talking about who's got some of the best players on defense.
I mean, look, I get it. LSU, Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, they recruit very well. I mean, seems to me that we've done a pretty decent job too. We lost all these guys to the NFL. I get it. But who we didn't lose is and here's another guy we didn't lose who seems to get overlooked a lot. Number 8, our corner, A.J. Terrell. I mean, do you forget that the second play of the game, the first pass from Tua was picked off and taken to the house by A.J. Terrell? That man is still out there. I said this about Clemson from the beginning of the year, and I am going to stand on my homer soapbox. What we lost in the front, even though we're supplanted with some guys, we don't rebuild, we reloaded, we were so much better on the back end this year than we were last year, and that is a big difference.
There's no. Let me put that one to bed. I think you're arguing a point that doesn't even deserve to be argued. Simply put, I said this to you earlier. If you're going to, and you've had this argument used against you, use past history in any way. The simple fact is, if you're going to look at Clemson and say, well, look, Clemson was a really good team, but your butt should be going into this year, they lost a lot on defense, and so they're not the same team. Their offense is almost entirely intact, if not more prolific, from a talent standpoint and from a player returning standpoint. That's not been the argument against Clemson this year, number 1. But number 2, I'll just say this. Clemson is 3rd in the country in points allowed per game and 4th in yards allowed per game. If that's a defense that fell off, you guys should have never been scored on at all last year. That's a damn good defense right now.
It sucks that
so
we
I don't
set
care
the
how
bar.
you're doing it. I don't care how you're no, but what did you do? You didn't set the bar any differently. This is just as good a defense. It's a different defense. You're still coached by the same coach.
That's my big thing. I mean, again, when I said Feinbaum's you still got Nick Saban. Well, yeah, we still got our We got Dabo. We got Venables. We got Scott. We got Tony Elliott. We got Reed. We got Caldwell. I mean, we've got one of the great successes that people have looked over the past year from Clemson is the fact that we've been able, unlike Alabama, who's done a phenomenal job because it's a carousel of coaches, we've been able to keep these guys here and stay on track. But you can't. Look,
I'll say, no,
they
you can't
put on the helmet.
You can, but I'll say a simple fact: as a rival in your conference, your second team kicked our ass last year just as bad as your first team did on defense. And guess what? That second team, some of those guys are your first team this year, and they're doing the same thing. That to me, like I look at it in this the playoff. I'm going to get away from the rankings. I just think the rankings are so flawed, and the logic they pretend to use, they're not really using, and you can poke holes in it. I do want to see the 4 best teams, and I do believe there is something called the eye test. I just want to make sure everybody's playing by the same rules of those eye tests. But I'll say this playoff, the winners of this playoff are going to come down to who plays the best defense. And right now, if you look at defense and the names being mentioned up there, it's Ohio State and Clemson that are playing defense right now.
I mean, Ohio State, man.
And neither one of them have an impressive resume to this point.
Like I said before this thing, I understand why LSU moved up and Ohio State went down. But it wouldn't have surprised me if they had left Ohio State at 1. It wouldn't have, because they dominated their opponent again.
Give me your logic on why Ohio State should have lost their position.
It's simple.
Yep.
It's simple. The logic was that 2 and 3 played, and Ohio State played a 2 or a 3 and 6 Maryland team.
Okay, all right. So let me bust that up. You said that your understanding is that each week is looked upon individually, in and of itself.
That's what they say, not what. That's what I said because that's what they said.
But if that's true, then throw out the 2 versus 3 because it's not really 2 versus 3 because that's not what played out,
Correct.
Right? And so in that essence, and it's different, but I also look at it and go, okay, so Ohio State took care of business, smoked a team, further padded their stats of being the elite by statistics, controlled game, everything you want to throw at it. So you're telling me that changed strength of schedule. And LSU looks good because they beat a team that has not won a top 25 game all year. So we manufactured the eye test on that one.
I know.
Is that what we did?
Yep, we did.
Okay.
Yes, we did.
Okay.
Yeah, that's why I keep saying it. At the end of the day, I mean, they've got to rank, in my mind, these metrics of what is most important to what is least important out of whatever metrics they're looking at. But at the end of the day, even if you did that, it still probably is going to come down to eye test because if they run into a conundrum, then the only thing they can do is say, well, if Alabama and Oregon lined up on the field, or Alabama and Minnesota lined up on a field today, Alabama's going to beat them. That's what they're going to say because that's an eye test, and that's unfortunate. At the end of the day, I mean, I do think everything will work itself out for the most part for the top 3. If the but that 4 slot, which we have seen the past couple years in this playoff, end up being a question mark. Should they get in? They didn't even play for their conference championship, but a team happens to make it in. I mean, that's at the end of the day, that 4th slot is going to be the argument. That's where it's going to end up being the argument that last week. If everybody handles their biz, that 4th slot is going to be the argument. Could it be that if that chaos scenario that Georgia loses to Auburn, depending on how bad they lose, and then they go on and win the SEC championship against LSU, but Alabama doesn't even play in the SEC championship, yet destroys Auburn in the Iron Bowl, where Georgia lost to Auburn but won the SEC championship? I mean, like, you're talking.
Well, no. Here's
chaos.
what we're doing. We're we're not doing it, but all that's being done in that logic is we are talking ourselves into perception. We're talking ourselves into why. Well, what? Because think about it, how many times do we hear the argument? Well, it's just because the SEC is so damn good.
Yeah.
It's so good. It's just
Yeah.
so good. Well, here's the whole point is, if that's the logic we want to go by, then let's just put the top 6 teams in the country at the beginning of the year as SEC teams and everybody, the Roy bus. Let's just have the
That's what
Roy
it
bus.
is. That's what it is.
And
it's
in that
always,
case,
there,
it's
no matter
a
what,
fraud.
No matter what, because you would never see that in any other conference. If it was a 2-loss conference champ in Clemson, if it was a 2-loss conference champ in Ohio State, if it was a 2-loss conference champ in Oregon, if it was a 2-loss conference champ, whether it's Baylor or Oklahoma, they're gone. Gone.
Well, let me just say this, okay? So we
But
I'll-
a 2-loss conference champ in the SEC, in addition to a potential 1-loss SEC team that either lost the conference championship or might have not even played in it, well, come on. It's the SEC.
See, but here's the whole thing is, so I look at it, and one thing that makes me laugh is Texas A&M. Texas A&M was a good team until it was time to discuss whether Clemson belonged in there or not. And that's when
Correct.
Texas A&M turned into a bad team. Because I watched the games, Texas A&M, Alabama versus Texas A&M, and A&M hung some points on Alabama later in the year when Alabama had some time to get ready. Clemson dominated Texas A&M in that game, and their offense was far from the way it's running right now. Far from it. Okay? So I look at it and I go, all we did was take a team and we made it fit a narrative. And now the narrative is, well, we're better off making Texas A&M not
So,
sound good
I
because
mean,
it clowns Clemson, in which case Clemson,
That
we can
common
argue Clemson.
opponent thing is just, I get using the common opponent metric, but it's not apples to apples, man. It's apples and oranges. It's crimson and orange, baby.
The only thing I take solace in is I believe that the records matter the most to me. And I'm not on the committee, so my opinion doesn't really matter. But the records matter the most. I do think we'll get the best team in college football, and I do think they'll make an absolute mess of the bottom portion of this. And again, I look at it. Remember something: a number 4 team has won the national championship.
Absolutely.
In just 5 years we've been doing this.
Only 1 year has an undefeated team won the whole thing.
Yeah. So
every national championship prior to us last year went into it with a loss.
It just seems to me that they're really just trying really hard to get the teams they want into the championship,
Well,
and
that's
shape
unfortunate.
the logic around that.
Yeah.
And if that's truly it, then again I go back to, why the hell do we even just announce this? Just come out and tell us who you want to play for the title.
Mm-hmm.
Just at the end of it all, just come out and try to tell us who you think it should be.
Yeah, I mean, well,
and
they can't
give
do
me your
that.
logic.
They can't do it because then it would be then it wouldn't be the Power 5. It would be the Power 1. It would be the Power 1.
Yeah.
It would be the SEC, and everybody else, like you said, would be on the Roy bus. It would be the Power 1.
Well, let's just
And
do
again,
it.
I'm not discounting the fact that the SEC is, even this year, still, in my mind, the best conference, and the SEC West is the best division of any conference, or the toughest. I'm not arguing that. I agree, but at some point in time, records have to matter.
Right, and that's my
where
point.
you get, if you achieving your goals in your conference and winning the whole damn thing has to have some bearing on this whole thing.
Yep, and my point is, they created the Power 5 for a reason, because they said that these conferences are the deepest conferences, the strongest conferences, and they should dominate college football. For better or for worse, that's the way they did it. Because the truth is, if you want to get to the best teams, and the NCAA really want to do something, this all became about money. Like, you remember the madness of, oh, wait a minute. Now there's title games. Title games now all of a sudden matter. So what happened? Conferences started loading up to get enough teams to have conference title games. Then a few people that were getting left out went, well, wait a minute, I don't want to get left out of the conference because the title games matter so much for us to be prominent. So what happened? You got these stacked conferences. And now all of a sudden we went from 9-team conferences to 12-team conferences to 14-team conferences. So everybody stacked in all these teams. And then we saw the decimation of the Big East dissolved. The Big 12 is all over the goddamn map. And you saw that. Well, the truth is you want to get the best football, then realign conferences and make it a powerhouse. Make the conferences a play-in. Don't go SEC this, SEC that. Go Southeast, Northeast, Southwest, Northwest. I mean, again, my whole point is, and I'm not saying you should go do that, but you've created this monster of a scenario, and it all comes down to who does big money, big TV want in it, and don't think they don't have a seat at the table.
Yeah, they want. I mean, dude, they want the SEC in. And honestly, look, at the end of the day, if you're looking for the best team, or whether it's the best team or the best two teams or the best four in this thing, the SEC, in my mind, should be involved in some way, shape, or form, because they're tough, and they've shown that they can lose a game and still win the whole dang gum thing.
Yep.
But, it's just the bias so much towards them rather than everybody else that confuses me. Okay? It's just so heavily weighted towards them that for the first time there could be a potential 2-loss conference champ in the SEC that they give a nod to get into this thing.
Yep.
Okay? Where they would never consider a 2-loss conference champ in the ACC, Big 12, Pac-12, and potentially Big 10. I don't think they'd even consider them with 2 losses, whether they win it or not.
Yeah.
And
Well, let me
the
put
fact that they would consider a 2-loss SEC champ, because they would, is a bit perplexing.
I would love to add, and we won't get into how this will play out, but I would love to add, we get our SEC fallout, like you said, and then let's throw some more mud in this, and let's have Minnesota lose this week in Iowa, lose in Wisconsin. Wisconsin goes to the title game. Let's have Penn State beat Ohio State. Let's have Ohio State then lose to Michigan. And then let's have Wisconsin beat Penn State. And you got all 2-loss teams in the Big Ten. And then you got that chaos in the SEC. Because here's what I want.
Big Ten's gone. Again, I just said it. Even if a 2-loss conference champ in the Big Ten,
but by
is
ranking,
not going to get in there.
But by rankings,
they'll
right
put a
now,
1-loss Alabama not playing for it in easily over that.
But by rankings right now, you could argue that ranking-wise, the Big Ten's stronger.
You could. Yeah, you could. But at the end of the day, they're going to look at it and be like, but they're not stronger than the SEC. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I want to see it play out. My thing is this, it clearly, I just feel like, and I felt like it in the first college football playoff, you were kind of like, whatever, because, you had Clemson in mind, which I understand, and you're right, but it's all a setup. It's a setup to trying to play something out the way they need to. They need, and I'll tell you the perfect example. The 2 teams that told me this was a setup, Auburn and Florida. In the first ranking, where they were ranked with 2 losses, looking at 2 undefeated teams sitting not below them, one of them way below them, who just beat a playoff team as of last week. And I just, I just see the setup. Now, we'll see what plays out. And LSU and Alabama could be, if we were able to really play this thing out, could be 2 of the best teams in college football.
Sure.
There is a lot to like about those teams. And I don't dislike them. I don't dislike them.
A lot of fun to watch.
Yeah.
Good football. Yeah. There's players everywhere.
It's unfair to say that just because they don't play as good a defense that you can say that their offense couldn't win. But at the same time, records got to matter. Like, they got to matter the most. They have to matter the most. Because there's nothing else more objective than just winning.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, but
because I could sit here,
not the way it goes.
Because I could argue, if you wanted to talk about sheer talent, I could argue Florida State's a hell of a lot better as a team than most of the teams they lost to. But they lost. Mm-hmm. They're not more talented. Their record is who they are. But I mean, are you going to tell me they play Boise State, 9 out of 10 times, or maybe not even 9 out of 10, 7 out of 10 times they win? Are they the better team? Yeah, if they win 7 out of 10 times, but they only played once, and Boise State beat them. Boise State's a better team.
Yep.
End of story.
Yeah.
That's how we decide things.
I know. So this is fun, buddy.
Yep.
And the way we're going to do this moving forward is because, there's not a bevy of games. I mean, there is still plenty of games to be played, but we will go from week to week now, kind of doing our recap preview in a collection of only the important games and touching on that, and then separating it and having this discussion because, it's going to continue to evolve every week. And we're going to see where this committee goes with it. We can poke holes in it. We can give more chaos scenarios, but it'll be played out on the field to hopefully tell us more. And, I would like to see, it shouldn't be so easy for this committee. It shouldn't be.
Sure.
And the way they're trying to set it up is to make it their life easier. I got to be honest. I feel like every year up until this point, and more since the first college football playoff, that these committees week to week have tried to set up situations to put themselves in an easier position the next week in making the rankings.
Yep.
So, it would be good to see them squirm a little bit. But I do want to continue to do it like we're doing. This is so important. And there's only 3 weeks left, man. There's only 3 weeks left in the regular season. I mean, it's blown by, and I hate to see it go. But, it is about enjoying the journey, and hopefully all works out the right way. But we know that doesn't always happen, and sometimes you're just going to have to swallow the pill. So we do appreciate you listening. And like I said in the previous one, we'll get this sucker up and out. We'll see you next time, as always, on the gridiron. Have a great day.